our first Reimagining Mobility seminar. We are so excited to have you all here with us today. My name is Heather Feldner. I am a white woman with short brown hair streaked with gray. I'm wearing dark glasses. And today I have on an orange dress, and I am in a conference room with a whiteboard behind me. I use she, her pronouns, and I do not identify as having a disability, although I am a family member of family members who identify as disabled. And so although I study disability and technology academically, the positionality that I have just described shapes and also limits the perspectives that I bring to these topics today. And I am here with my co-host from Create, Kat Steele, and I'll let Kat introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you this fall. We're so excited to have everyone back here for our second Reimagining Mobility series. I'm Kat Steele. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an associate professor of mechanical engineering here at the University of Washington, and another one of the associate directors of Create. Today I'm wearing my red fall sweater, still at home with a blurry background, and I'm excited to get started and have Karen here today. So I'm going to turn it back to Heather. So thank you, everyone.
So this series of seminars is being hosted by Create, which is an acronym for Center for Research and Education on Accessible Technology and Experiences. And it's a fairly new center here at UW that spans across many departments, and including computer science and rehabilitation medicine and engineering, human-centered design and engineering, as well as the information school. And the focus of Create is to do research and create innovations that make technology more accessible, and also use technology to make the world more accessible. And so in light of that, before we begin, I just want to share some accessibility notes as well as logistical items with you for our seminar today. So we are using Zoom, and we have both captioning and ASL interpretation today. And thank you to our interpreters, Teresa and Shannon. They are spotlighted on our video, or on our Zoom screen, so you'll have continued access between speakers. If you'd like to access the captions, you can click on the Zoom controls on your screen. The CC button will allow you to view the captions or a live transcript, whichever you prefer. And please do message us through the chat if you're having any issues with those. The meeting is going to be recorded, and we will post our recording as well as a printed transcript of the meeting after we conclude today. And if you would like a large print copy, just shoot an email to Kat or myself, and we're happy to provide that as well. And just a note about self-care. We ask you to do whatever you need to do to participate in the session today. In person, we would invite you to move around or knit or fidget or take notes or draw or just listen. And in person, we're going to invite you to do the same. And as well as invite you to participate with your video on or off as you are comfortable, although having your video on can assist with interpretation. And you can participate in the meeting by using the chat box, or you can use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question, or feel free to communicate asynchronously via email or phone. And we just want to remind you to please remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Let's see. Accessibility is an ongoing learning process, of course, and so there are often competing accessibility needs, and this process is something that we constantly learn from. And so if you have any feedback for us, please let us know so we can do better in the future. And We are going to be starting today with I'm going to do a brief introduction to our speaker, Karen, today. And then we'll have her presentation and we'll move into a question and answer period for the last 15, 20 minutes or so of our session today. And so we would love you to respond to her presentation or ask a question. And with that, I will introduce you to our wonderful speaker today, Karen Braitmayer, and we are so excited to have her here. Karen is an architect and inclusive designer, and she is the founding principal of Studio Pacifica, which is an accessibility consulting firm based right here in Seattle, Washington. And her quote unquote good fight has focused on supporting equity and full inclusion for people with disabilities. And Karen is an award winner. In 2019, she was chosen as a winner of the AIA, which I believe is the Architectural Institute of America. Karen, you can correct me if I am wrong. She won the Whitney Young Jr. Award, which is a really prestigious award given to an architect who embodies social responsibility and activism and addresses relevant and pressing issues in society. So in the 48-year history of that award, she was the first recipient honored for her work in the area of civil rights for people with disabilities. That's really, really exciting. Karen was also appointed by former President Barack Obama to the United States Access Board, and that's a position that she still holds today. And so in addition to that brief introduction, what we'd also like to do is show you a short video and that further introduces Karen and some of her work in and around our area. And I'm going to do a brief audio description prior to playing the video since an automated one is not available. But the video will be captioned. And so the video that I'm going to be showing starts by showing a silver steel building against a blue sky and the words, "What is good architecture?" written across the screen. It then shows examples of buildings labeled as eye-catching and iconic with various images of the Seattle Space Needle seen through red and orange Chihuly glass flowers, followed by an image of the interior of a library with desks and open spaces and the words, "How about accessible?" It then cuts to Karen being interviewed on screen and footage of Karen driving through and interacting with various interior spaces, while more images of Seattle buildings flash on the screen, including the Amazon spheres and the Space Needle again, and the Central Library, Karen opening and driving through a glass door. And then the words, "Karen Studio consults with architects to make their designs more accessible," show up on the screen, followed by the words, "Things like door weight, sign height, and readability, lighting, and audio levels" appear on the screen as well. The montage ends with the words, "You might recognize some of the places Karen's helped make accessible." And these again are followed by different words and images of the Space Needle, the Central Library, and Pike Place Market. And the video ends with a sunset bird's eye view of the city of Seattle. So I will share my screen and we will show the video.
Accessible architecture is good architecture. It creates places for all people, makes everybody feel comfortable and welcomed. When I started in architecture, I wasn't really interested in focusing on my disability, but on what I loved, which was making things. As time went on, I discovered that I had a particular perspective that not everybody shared. And maybe you could even say a line of sight that was unique. I think architects want to make things accessible. They may just need some guidance on how the best way is to do that. As we age, our abilities all change, and we will benefit from those things that we call, accessible features. So really, this is it for everybody. People might say, the city doesn't work for me. Well, what's the best way to make impact on that, right? Is to be involved in the design of our cities. And I think architecture is like the best way to do that.
That is a lovely introduction to a conversation that I am so excited about. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Karen Braitmayer. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much. And it's always kind of a little like, ooh, when I see that video. It's like, oh no, that's what I really look like. So thank you. My name is Karen Braitmayer, and I am speaking to you today from my office here in Seattle. And I acknowledge that I am a guest on this land, home of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. For those of you who can't access the video of me, I'm a white woman in my mid-60s. I have short cropped brown hair and wear glasses. And today I have on a navy blue shirt, and behind me is a orange hanging with big circles on it. So that's quite powerful. And if I were live and in person, you would see me sitting in my power wheelchair or notice that I wear hearing aids. So I'm going to start today. Hold on, I've got something on my screen that I need to get rid of. Anyways, I'm going to start today by sharing 3 questions that I often get asked, and hopefully I'll answer in our talk today. So what was life like for a person with a disability prior to the passage of the ADA? And what buildings do I think successfully go beyond the regulations? And what still needs to be done to assure great access? So life prior to the ADA. Well, thinking back, people like me, 40 or 50 years ago, who had a disability really believed that the environment, we had to adapt to the environment. The environment was not going to change for us. My first inclination that that might not necessarily be true was actually starting architecture school. I walked into design studio on that first day, and there was like a sea of tall drafting tables and stools. And I thought, ooh, I'm sitting down here in my chair and the table's up there. That's not really a very good fit. But after studio, a bunch of my classmates got together. They got some supplies. They pried the top off one of those tall drafting tables, and they built a completely new base. And all of a sudden, I was at the right level to be able to access all the same stuff that my classmates did. That was my first concrete example, you might say, that changing my environment could change my abilities. So today I'm going to share a little bit more with you. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. And we can see the screen, I hope. So great, thank you. So today we're going to talk about how you have the power to create a beautifully accessible world. And you have the power to be both a great designer and a design advocate. Now, if you think that the architecture community had a large role in the passage of the ADA and other laws? Think again. The truth is that people with disabilities, their advocates and allies, were really the primary drivers who led the charge. In this image, we're seeing World War II veterans with signs protesting. They were advocating for their service benefits. They, people who were injured in the war in those days were coming home actually with, more, or they had healed more than was expected in previous wars. Anyways, and so they expected to be able to come back and have a full life, and that they were faced with barriers. And so they advocated to get service benefits, but that advocacy actually went further. Parents of children with disabilities began to demand access to education and to services. And those kids grew up and they began to advocate for personal autonomy and the civil rights of people with disabilities. Some of you might be young enough not to know, but when I was a young person, it was not common that young people with disabilities went to their neighborhood schools. They were often segregated into separate schools or separate classrooms. And parents were trying very hard to ensure that their kids got an education. Some students, even today, are not supported in their neighborhood schools, and that has got to change. By the mid-70s, that activism was a national force to contend with. People with disabilities were asking not only for access to education, but to buildings, all different federal buildings, community buildings, transportation, everything. Think about it. If you can't use public transportation, how are you going to hold down a job and participate in community events? So slowly and painfully, laws were passed, and we're seeing an image here, iconic images of this disability rights movement. And you'll notice the difference between the earlier image of the veterans who were typically all sitting in exactly the same wheelchair. And now we have a diverse group of people with a wide range of disabilities, all protesting, sitting in chairs with their guide dogs, everything. So 31 years ago, the ADA was passed. And even today, full access is not a given. Today, people with disabilities continue to advocate for change that supports true diversity, equity, inclusion, and full accessibility. Disability rights are civil rights. And I'm hoping that by now, all of you guys have seen the documentary Camp, which was running on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but it's an awesome documentary following sort of the birth of the disability rights movement. And I really encourage you to watch that. So, spurred on by equity protests, major brands go all out to promote the concept of diversity and inclusion for underrepresented communities, including disability. And I got to tell you, it warms my heart when I see, like Facebook and Google and Microsoft all encouraging inclusion of people with disabilities, not only in the workplace, but in social and community groups. So it's important for all of us to know how we can work together to get that done. So when it comes to accessible design, are you clear on the difference between environments that aim to be code compliant and environments that strive to be inclusive to all? So that's what I'm hoping to really highlight today. So it's easy for us to say, let's go beyond the accessibility regulations and create something that is designed fabulous. So what we're going to show you today are some great projects that took a creative leap, and if maybe one or that tried and didn't get there. And in case it's not obvious, I'm hoping to make accessibility allies that will spread the word that accessibility can be beautiful. So one way to tell if a project works for everyone is to look at the face of a person with access needs as they navigate the space. And yep, that's me sitting up on the upper deck of Seattle's Space Needle. And you can see the view of Lake Union behind me. Oh my gosh, we're 500 plus feet up. Whew. And I'm clearly thrilled with the fact that what was inaccessible to me before is now very accessible. Our office worked with the Space Needle renovation project, and there is now a platform lift that takes you from the interior observation deck out to the exterior observation deck. So now people with mobility devices can get out where they weren't able to before. The other change they made, which you can see in this picture, is that instead of having a solid rail that went up to, 42 inches around the observation deck, now there's glass all the way down to the floor, which makes it possible for a very kind of experience to see the city that way. But it's also inclusive. Anybody, no matter what your height, can get that same thrill. So, everyone just wants to live a full life, right? That's exactly why we do what we do at Studio Pacifica. And we are encouraging you to take a look at what can be done when a designer and a client are committed to creating beautifully accessible environments. So people with disabilities, we're considered a minority, but we're a really, really big minority. 1 out of 4 adults in the US have a disability. That's like 61 million adults. And that doesn't count children under the age of 18. So everything that we're doing here supports not only a segment of the community, but also people who benefit from the features, like parents who are rolling strollers through stores, and some of us who might be getting a little older and need a little bit more lighting to read the menu in the restaurant. Lately, I have been getting a lot of requests from clients to create universally accessible environments. And honestly, I'm not exactly sure what that means. So every time I have to ask, what does that mean to you? Well, I think what they're looking for is possibly perfection, something that is 100% usable and functional and beautiful for everybody. And I'm not exactly sure that that's possible, because we have so many needs in our community that sometimes they can be overlapping. And also, when you set a really high goal like that, designers can get kind of intimidated or worried, and then they sort of step back and they say, oh, I'm just going to meet the regulations, because if I try to do something like creative, I might get it wrong. So here's the 3 things that I advise clients about how to address things so that they are as accessible as possible. First, provide options and choices for how people interact with the environment. An example might be providing the same soap dispenser, but at different heights or different locations in the bathroom. Why do they all have to be the same? Or providing different widths of seating in the auditorium. Some people like a little bit more generous width in their seat. So that's providing options and choices. The next is to learn about the codes and regulations so you can read them and understand how you can go beyond, because the language gives you clues. So, for example, when a code dimension is listed as 34 inches maximum, that means that less than 34 inches is okay and might even be better. Versus if they say the dimension must be 18 inches exactly. Well, then you have only a tiny little bit of wiggle room on either side of that dimension. The code might say that accessible parking must be at least 5% of all parking spaces. Well, that's your clue to know that more than 5% is good or better. So that was our second one, was learning about the codes and regulations. And the third is talking to folks with lived experience about their suggestions. People with disabilities are great innovators, and they have all sorts of hacks and ideas. I mean, think about it. Most of us have had to kind of hack our way through the environment just to, make it through the world. So we can often rattle off a wish list of changes that can make a positive benefit for all of us. Okay, enough preaching. Let's get to some good pictures. So here we are in honor of the 2021 Olympic Games. We thought we would start with a stellar example and a stellar accessibility focus of the US Olympic and Paralympic Museum in Colorado. So this image here is a picture of a silver metal building against a blue sky with the mountains in the background. When it came to access, the architects worked with many Paralympic athletes, as well as a project accessibility consultant, all people with lived experience, in order to design at the architectural level they hope to achieve. And just, as a quick note here, it says, our old thinking was handicap design is inherently ugly, but we know that new thinking is inclusive design is a creative opportunity. So this museum, here we're back at the Paralympic, Olympic and Paralympic Museum, and we're seeing another angle of this silver metal building against a blue sky. The museum's most notable attribute is its high level of accessibility. The architects borrowed inspiration from the Guggenheim Museum in New York, where they started sort of the path through the museum at the top, and then you follow a series of ramps kind of spiraling down towards the bottom, visiting exhibits on the way. There are no steps in the building, and the goal is to eliminate any differences in the museum experience among people with varying abilities. One thing I want to point out is the accessibility consultant, I Design Access. Ileana Rodriguez is a Paralympic swimmer who became an architect to support the design of spaces that embrace and honor the diversity of athletes in sport. I think that's so impressive. And now we're seeing another picture of the large atrium space in the middle of the museum. And you can see that there are sort of wide angled walls that angle in towards the center of the room, and in the center of the center wall is actually like a video screen. It has a big picture of a swimmer on the block getting ready to spring into action. And that down below there are a number of people moving through the atrium space, including wheelchair users. So the New York Times tells us that accommodations here are the norm. You know, all the ramps are shallow slope and they're wide enough that 2 wheelchair users can roll side by side, and they have sign language interpreters in the corners of all the videos. And one thing you can see in this picture is that because the angling walls, as they slope from the floor towards the center of the room, those could be, you know, barriers to people of low vision, but they have either benches or cane rails around them. But the thing that I think is really cool about the museum, you can't see in the picture, and that is that every visitor who arrives is given a badge on a lanyard, and then you're taken to a kiosk where you can register any of your unique needs. Things like maybe you'd like enlarged type or audio versions of type, or maybe reduced sensory triggers. So as you move through the museum and you get to an exhibit, the exhibit sensor recognizes the badge and your custom kind of needs, and they change the display automatically. And I think that's brilliant. So I think it's interesting that the New York Times called those accommodations, and I would call it just brilliant and inclusive design, and maybe the way the museum should be. So the idea that accessibility serves not only people with mobility issues, but all sorts of other conditions, including sort of the neurodiverse differences like autism and ADHD and dyslexia. This was a creative challenge that this museum and design team embraced, and they succeeded in recognizing that even within the disability community, we need to acknowledge and embrace our diversity. So here's our next example. This is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And this is another sort of glass building with curves up against a blue sky and with a stone base. So the thing that's really amazing about the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is that how strongly their core values are inclusion for people with disabilities. If you go to their webpage, I think it's a world-class example of how to identify for visitors what they might expect when they come to visit. Their webpage is explicit on how to reach the museum, what you might experience when you're there. It's a perfect example of the sort of know before you go philosophy that allows people with disabilities to feel confident that when they go to a place, they can really do everything they want to see. And then this next image of the Canadian Museum shows some of the features that they have. So you see white stripes on the ground. Those are actually textural and allow someone who uses a white cane to follow that stripe, and it will take you to places of interest. They have, you can see on the wall, there's a video and a sign language interpreter embedded in the corner of the video. And then they have increased lighting on the interpretive plaques to make it possible for folks to access that as well. And then they have a downloadable app, another thing that you can't see here in the picture, a really great downloadable app that provides a virtual tour and information about the museum in multisensory information. And then our last picture here of the museum is about inclusive seating. So we're seeing a gentleman sitting in a wheelchair, sitting next to a curved bench. And there's a little girl on that bench, and that bench has a backrest and armrests, which are awesome for helping people need a little support when rising. So really that's, inclusive seating because they're sitting shoulder to shoulder. So let's get into some more local stuff. So we're seeing a picture here of a bar. And this is the Deep Dive, which is Amazon Spheres. It's a very dark, kind of upholstered, velvety kind of place. When people go out to have fun, they just want to sit with their friends, right? But this is an example of if designers follow the accessibility rules and regulations, it doesn't always get you an inclusive solution. So the regulations tell us that all bars have to have a section that are the right height for a person who uses a mobility device. So typically that would be a 34-inch counter, but we all know that bars are typically up at 42 inches where you sit on a stool. So that means someone who sits down, you're sitting down here and your friends are up there. It's not really very inclusive. In this particular project, we took advantage of a change in the floor level. And if you can see my cursor, maybe not, the left side of the bar is actually over a raised floor, and the right side of this bar is over a lowered floor. So the bar is a continuous height, but the people sitting are sitting in different kinds of chairs, and they're all at eye level. So to me, this was a win-win. And then just in case you're worried, there's like a ramp down here in the lower right corner that takes you from that higher floor down to the lower floor. And there's an opening behind this wall that surrounds the ramp that allows you to get in, and you could sit down on these lower chairs in the banquettes. This is the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley, and what we're seeing here is a very bright orange spiral ramp in the middle of an atrium. Doesn't this look like fun? Actually, it is. I've ridden down it, super fun. It's kind of hard to go up, but there's elevators, thank heavens. So what made this such an iconic design solution? Well, people with disabilities were intimately involved in the design process. This is a building that's home to many disability-related organizations. So they were able to make this impact and make this iconic space. But here's a challenge for you. When you design a project that has a spectacular access feature, or maybe one not quite as bold as this, but still a good one, I encourage you to pitch it to the media, the press, so that architects and designers can see examples of great accessibility in the work that's being shown. So this is the Hunters Point Community Library we're seeing here. Well, I'll describe it in just a second. There's been a lot of controversy about this library. The design is very impressive. It's designed to be like an open living room for this community, and it certainly looks impressive from the exterior. But as it stands, some places in this library are like this image. So what we're seeing is a set of stairs on the left, and at each stair landing, there's a set of bookshelves. So these stacks that we're seeing here on the right are only accessed by stairs. And to me, that flies in the face of full access, that you would have a community building, that there are some places that people with disabilities can't get in. And to make it even worse, this is where they put their current fiction. So, I mean, if you want to go browse for your next beach read, you know, you'd have to ask a librarian to get one. Not great architecture, in my opinion. And here we are at the understory at Amazon Spheres. What we're seeing is the inside of this sort of exhibit space, looking out through the unusual sort of skeleton of the sphere. And this project is another excellent example of multi-sensory experiences that embrace the diversity within disability. So this is this exhibit space is open to the public, and it provides multi-sensory exhibits that pair visible, audible, and tactile information at every exhibit. There are hands-on opportunities to explore models of the building, live plants, you know, because it's telling us about the Amazon sphere, which is basically a giant conservatory filled with exotic plants. This is your opportunity to kind of test drive that. And I think another thing that made this a very successful project is people with lived experience were involved in the design process. So I talked a little bit earlier about having choice. So this project, what we're looking at here is a large open plaza at a university, University of New Mexico. And you're seeing a sort of a sandstone building at the top of the page. And then in the center, a sort of oval space that has branching pathways off of it. The renovation of this existing plaza really jumped out to me because a singular design decision was made that makes it easy for people who are blind to move comfortably through the middle of this wide open space. And you know what? Frankly, that's kind of unusual. So people who are blind use like a tactile reference point to move through space. And that might be the intersection of a floor material and a wall, or the edge of a landscape border or something. But typically that means if you're going to enter a plaza, a big open plaza, you have to go all the way around the edge in order to get to the other side. Because you can't cut through the middle, there's no reference point. But here, tactile material that contrasts both in color and in texture was taken down to the center of the pathways to make it possible for people to cut through the middle and take a shortcut. And I think that's a beautiful example of thoughtful access. We all know that existing codes and regulations around accessibility don't equitably address the needs of the deaf or hard of hearing members of our community and the blind or low vision community. But there is work being done. And that takes me to the innovation that is deaf space. Now, I'm going to assume that deaf space is not news to this audience, but it certainly is to most architects. It's a remarkable guideline. Together, architects and designers with lived experience brought forth the most innovative disability-related design concept in recent years, addressing the sensory benefits of designing to accommodate deaf and hard of hearing community. Can a building enhance communication among deaf people? Can it create a greater sense of security and awareness of your surroundings? Well, buildings on the Gallaudet University campus were test projects to demonstrate that the answer is yes. Clearly, this is important to the deaf community, and we should be, thankful that they did all that work. But why is this important to the design profession? Well, because this project demonstrates that bringing together designers and people with lived experience can culminate in new expressions of design and the way architecture affects our physical and sensory experiences. Accessibility is focused on removing barriers to people who use mobility devices, frankly. DefSpace shows that sensitively designed architecture can make everyone's experiences richer and more satisfying, and which turns the sort of let's just meet the minimums attitude of barrier removal around to how to create spaces that do more or enhance our lives. So to me, DefSpace is the physical manifestation of a community culture. So we have been talking about design and how designers can creatively address diverse needs. But here's another point of diversity that I just have to address. So when it comes to diversity, as you know, people with disabilities are practically invisible in most design professions. I firmly believe that if our professions are committed to reaching the next level of design excellence, we need to change this. How might we do that? Well, design schools need to make a concerted effort to increase diversity by reaching out and welcoming students with disabilities. Design firms need to be encouraged to increase diverse perspectives by hiring and supporting the careers of designers with disabilities. That means making hiring procedures all the way through work accommodations available. The best and the brightest designers might come in a body that is different than employers expect. So I encourage the design communities to support this critical goal. So if you're going to take anything away from this presentation, I hope that it's the knowledge that you as a designer or architect have the power to change people's lives, as well as a better understanding of why universal design is a social justice issue. So thank you for listening, and thank you for using your power.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. That was fantastic. We'll give our virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing both all the principles, the awesome examples, and now I just want to go and visit all of these places. I'm from Colorado Springs originally, and I want to go back and visit the new museum. And I feel like I need to go downtown to the Amazon Spheres and the deep dive bar as well. But so thank you for all of that. That was fantastic. I'm going to lead off with one question, but if anyone else has questions, feel free to raise your hand and then we'll call on you and you can unmute, or you can type it into the chat as well. And Nicole and Kim, two of our awesome team members here, are helping us monitor those as well. So Karen, I get the privilege of leading off. Thank you again for all these examples. You were great engaging with us this last spring too. And one of the topics that came up repeatedly in the spring Reimagining Mobility series was visibility, whether people can visit and really engage in these shared environments. And today you shared a lot of great examples for large public works, museums, marketplaces. Can you think of examples from these large museums and marketplaces that we can really take to our homes and some of these smaller places to make visibility more widespread?
I think when it comes to residential or any kind of smaller, whether it's a small workplace or small, art gallery or anything like that, I think the first thing you want to start with is a no-step entrance. And thinking about how to look at any home and find a door, whether it's your back door, your garage door, your front door, and find a way to ramp that, or in some other way make it rollable. I think that's the best way. If we have time, I have a little anecdote. There's a community effort very popular in the Southeast called Concrete Change, and they advocate for visitability in homes. And I got to visit a neighborhood, a whole neighborhood built with homes that were visitable. And I was talking with one of the homeowners, and she said, well, you know, we bought this house. It was a modest home. We bought this as our first house. And she said, we just like the neighborhood. We didn't think anything about the fact that it was visitable. And then her sons were born, twin sons. And one of her sons actually ended up having cerebral palsy. And she said, it's amazing. He can visit all of the other kids in the neighborhood because he can get in their homes. And I can assure you that that is not a common feature here in Seattle.
Yeah, thanks for that example. As our ramp is threatening to fall down outside, but I'm still loving it for our strollers also. It's a great example. Mark Harness here from UW Disability Studies also had a question, and he says, I love the idea of customized access, but what happens in the Olympic Museum when people have access cards for competing access needs and they both arrive at the exhibit at the same time? Have you seen that? And then Andy, we'll go to you next after this one.
You know, actually, I don't know the answer to that because I have not seen it. But I do think, I mean, you might be forced to take turns, you know, only one at a time. I don't know. I just think it's a brilliant first step in terms of allowing people to have a more seamless experience. The idea that you have to go and set each thing in a way that allows you to engage with it it's just frustrating over time.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Sarah Hendren's comments on the bike lanes in Boston last spring and how it's just trying it and having the humility and grace to see what happens. So I guess we'll all have to go visit and see what happens.
Exactly.
Andy, would you like to, or if anyone has been there, please unmute. But Andy, would you like to unmute and ask your question, please?
It's more of a shout out versus a question, but I appreciate the presentation, Karen. I actually graduated from the University of New Mexico with the photo for Smith Plaza that you showed. And I can tell you that was an accessibility nightmare on so many levels before the redesign. It was basically a lower level, so it was staircases to get into it all. There was a ramp that got to it that we've lovingly referred to as the gauntlet, because you had wheelchair users, bicyclists, and blind folks coming through, and there was no line of sight for the wheelchair users and the cyclists to see each other, or someone with a cane coming through. So it was always, it was terrible. But the firm that was hired for that actually consulted with a staff member who I worked with, and she's blind. And so those tactile features are because of them working with a user that I frequently would have to walk across the plaza with her because it was impossible to navigate.
That's great to hear that it really is positive. That's great.
Reminds me of our light rail stations too. I've heard great things about them as well in Seattle. So I think we have time for one more question. And so as a closing question, just so we can respect everyone's time. Okay, we'll let Maria's question come in real fast. If you have a quick opinion she asks, what is your opinion on the bike lanes that are being implemented in Seattle? Do you have an opinion on that, Karen?
There are pluses and minuses with bike lanes. I think the idea of separating bikes from pedestrian ways and vehicular ways is definitely safer. I struggle a little bit with the change in access to parking for people who drive modified vehicles. And so I feel like there's opportunity for doing better in that area.
Yeah, it's always an evolving one. And that actually leads great into my closing question, which is, our next speakers this fall in the series are Yokai from Illinois, John and Anat from here at UW, And they're really going to be sharing some tools and technology for increasing the accessibility of navigating our cities and environments. You know, as an architect, how can you see, or how do you wish that urban infrastructure and architecture could really work together to improve accessibility? Any ideas there?
I think that there's already a dialogue between the requirements of, in an urban setting, of accessibility for buildings and for the public rights of way. I think there's more that can be done and should be done in terms of kind of controlling the sidewalks and crosswalks and stuff, and sort of reducing unexpected interventions, you know, like, you know, bike litter, and, or I guess now it's scooter litter, you know, things that are occurring unexpectedly and make it difficult for people to navigate, whether it's not having a wide enough path, or not knowing that there's going to be something that you could potentially trip over if you're a person in the blindness community. So I think it's on its way. It's just not there yet.
Well, with that, this is Heather speaking. With that, Karen, we just want to say thank you again so very much for taking the time to be here today and to be a part of this series. One more round of applause for you. And we're just so excited that those of us in the Seattle community get to experience your contributions to our community on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to everyone for being here as well. This is becoming just such a wonderful and diverse community of folks interested in these topics. And we just are thrilled that you took the time out of your day to join us today and to hear Karen speak. A quick plug, we have 2 other sessions coming up as Kat mentioned. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. There's our flyer is shown on the screen here with the different speakers, including Karen, who we heard from today. On the 18th of November, Yochai Eisenberg from University of Illinois Chicago is going to be speaking on barrier removal planning and accessible pedestrian networks. And then on December 9th, for our final conversation of the fall series, our very own John Freilich and Anat Caspi from University of Washington will be collaborating to speak on their work in urban accessibility from crowdsourcing to AI. And that also includes a subsequent hands-on tutorial of one of John's projects called Project Sidewalk. So we're really, really excited about this series, and we hope that you join us for our future conversations. And again, thank you so much for attending. We will be posting the recording of this video, and we will also be sending out a brief feedback survey. And we hope you take a few minutes to let us know what you thought of today's session and what we can do better in the future. And also, if you have any speaker ideas for the future as well. So with that, I will say thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day.